Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, a white coup in a black city in Alabama. Alabamians are paying a private attorney as much as we pay Nick Saban. But he is defending our unconstitutional prisons. We're interviewing presidential candidate Marianne Williamson about her campaign. All that and more on today's Valley Labor Report. If you want to be part of the program, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week and we might answer it on the next show. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us online, particularly at our website, TVLR.fm. You're going to want to bookmark that page because we update that pretty regularly with new reports and articles that we don't have time to cover during the show. So make sure that you check that out, TVLR.fm. We're also anywhere you find anything online, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program, make a one-time donation, or buy our merch, again, you can go to our website. That's tvlr.fm. If you want to buy merch, you can go to tvlr.fm/store. If you want to make a donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report, something that I don't plug a whole lot, but on Patreon, we do upload a completely ad-free version of the show at the same time that we upload our podcasts. So if you want to listen to the show without the commercials, without the ad breaks, then you can become a patron, patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. We could not do this without our local union sponsors. So we are always happy to talk to any union executive board, speak at a general meeting, go to a conference or a convention, anything like that. If there are any questions, always happy to be available for conversations about that. You can reach out to us directly for more details on that. You can just shoot us a DM on any of our social media pages or send us a note through our website at tvlr.fm/contact, and we'll get that conversation going.
Absolutely. We really appreciate those sponsors. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed today in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists that believe Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
There we go. So first up, this story by Lee Hedgepeth that broke last week is just really wild stuff out of New Bern, Alabama, where a small black majority town that has always been governed by the white minority without elections, which I don't even know how you do that, but they have, over the, for decades, the mayorship and the council has just been handed down from friend to friend among the white minority in the town without any election. And so Patrick Braxton, he decided that he wanted to run for mayor in 2020, and, he went to the current officials of the town at that time and, inquired about the process for, having an election and for being a candidate in said election. And he got no answers from the incumbent regime. And so he ended up going to, some state level authorities and figuring out how to run. And so he did that. He filed all the paperwork, he paid all of the fees, and he was able to get on the ballot. And the previous mayor, Woody Stokes, having never had to run for an election despite being mayor, didn't file any of the paperwork, didn't pay any of the fees to be on the ballot, and so he wasn't. And so Patrick Braxton was elected mayor of New Bern, Alabama in 2020, a small town of 275 people in the Black Belt in Alabama. And following that, the former government just decided, nah, we're not going to do that. And they ignored the election. They did not allow him into the mayor's office. They did not allow him to appoint a council, since nobody else ran for council. Nobody else ran for council in New Bern, and so the process then, under the way that New Bern is set up, is for the mayor to appoint the council. So he appointed the council, and the incumbents just ignored all of that, and then did these weird maneuvers, and now they're saying that no, actually we had a different election and we won that election. It's really wild stuff that's going on down there in this town, because in the last official election in New Bern, Alabama in 2020 for the municipal offices, Patrick Braxton won. He won the election because he was the only person on the ballot. And he's a black man, and the white minority in the town of New Bern just decided we're not going to abide by the results of the election. And so he has been fighting a 3-year legal battle, Patrick Braxton has, the rightful mayor of New Bern, Alabama, to basically get the government to come in and mandate and throw down an injunction on the previous government in New Bern so that he can assume his office. I really don't know what else to say other than, holy crap, how is this happening in, the year of our Lord 2023? This is really wild stuff, and it's the kind of stuff that you hear, that you read about, that happened during Redemption in the South after Reconstruction fell. After Reconstruction ended and the North pulled out the troops, in states and cities and municipalities and towns across the South, the white minority, and in some places the white majority, began to once again deprive our black brothers and sisters of the right to vote and hold offices. One of the most, one of the biggest events of that happened in Alabama was in Eufaula, where dozens of people were murdered by white supremacists in, 1874, because they were voting. And in 1874, that election, if I remember correctly, 4,000 black folks voted in and around Eufaula. And in the following election, only 10 did, after the massacre in Eufaula by the White Citizens League. And so obviously, thankfully, there is no massacre in New Bern, Alabama. There is no violence happening as of yet. But it is a white minority deciding that they're not going to listen to the will of the people in their town and coup the government. But, the Secretary of State has nothing to say about this. Neither does the Attorney General or anything like that. There's a lot more to the story and a lot more detail, so I'm just going to point you to Lee's reporting on it. I mean, it's a fascinating story and amazing that nobody else in the media in Alabama has picked up on this in the last 3 years. But go to his website, treadbylee.com, and read that story because it's some wild stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Great reporting there by Lee. I really appreciate that. And, saddened but not surprised that nobody in official capacity really had much comment. I'll say that the state rep and the state senator for the area, Singleton and Travis, they both did speak to Lee, and they both had, I thought, good comments. But, the Secretary of State had nothing to say, and that's really wild to me. I mean, like you said, you had basically a town coup occur in this state. Where is the state government here? It's that's very disturbing that this would happen. And we all know small town rural politics can be pretty brutal, but that takes the cake, an actual coup. Yeah.
Wild stuff, but we're going to take a break, and we will be right back with presidential candidate Marianne Williamson to talk about her campaign, Labor and Love. We'll be right back.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
The sign hit the city like a bolt of lightning.
You know the photo. It's iconic. Marches in the streets holding a simple sign with a simple message.
I am a man.
The I Am Story podcast explores the fight that inspired those words, how a group of sanitation workers in Memphis stood up and made history.
They don't see us as men and women.
Go to iamstory.com or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you.
Sinyard Law. And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case.
Sinyard Law. A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, and my co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can send us a text message at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. And let's just jump right into our conversation with Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson is a best-selling author, political activist, and spiritual thought leader. She is the founder of a nonprofit organization that began during the AIDS crisis to help people suffering from the disease that has delivered more than 14 million meals. She is a spiritual counselor, too, and has been a frequent guest of Oprah. She ran for president in 2020 and is running again in 2024, but most importantly for her resume, she is today's guest on the Valley Labor Report. Marianne, welcome to the program, and thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
So, you've been making the rounds a lot lately, and you've been in the news a lot. I, was going through your website, taking a look at where you have shown up in the news, and a lot of these interviews are hitting really good and similar things. What your platform is, why you're running, do you have a chance, are you a spoiler, things like that. We're going to go over some of those things, but in thinking about how we would make this as useful as possible for our audience, what I want to do is talk about some of that stuff that I haven't seen anyone else ask you, and maybe dive a little bit deeper into things of particular concern for our audience. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Awesome. So, and for folks who aren't familiar with Marianne, I recommend checking out the following: Max Alvarez's interview with her on the Real News Network. He's a friend of the show, and that interview was really great. Her campaign launch speech really lays out kind of her vision for the presidency and why she's running, so definitely would recommend checking that out. She was on The Breakfast Club a while ago. That's another good interview that she's done, and her website has a laundry list of priorities in areas like children, crime prevention, criminal justice, the economy, education, health, and labor, and most of these sections really include pretty significant detail and a lot of specific things that I'm supportive of, some of which we're going to talk about today, but we certainly won't be able to get to all of it, so recommend checking out your website. That'll be our homework to the audience. And at least check it out before you go vote in the primary next year.
So I want to open our discussion by talking about the state of the country. Across beliefs and demographics, there really seems to be a widespread sense of alienation and despair. There seems to be a sense that our society is profoundly sick, that our social fabric is breaking down. And we can see the trend of increased mental illness, the increases in deaths of despair, and the loneliness reported by so many. I heard Max Alvarez in his interview with you talk about a nightmarish deja vu, and I thought that was a great way of putting it. And I'll borrow from some song lyrics from Father John Misty and say that there's a sense that everything is getting worse while staying eerily the same. And again, this seems to cut across beliefs and demographics, though of course there's obviously wildly different perspectives about what all this means or what's behind it all. But it does seem in my assessment that there appears to be a moral crisis, a spiritual crisis even in this country, as we try to survive a society that is engineered around exploitation and oppression, as we try to survive a rigged economy, corrupt politics, a poisoned environment, a collapsing climate. Personally, I figure the only way out is a working class movement rooted in love, justice, and solidarity, and one powerful enough to bring real democratic transformation. So I'm curious to hear your response, Ms. Williamson, and if you could talk about the state of the American people and, the spiritual energy in this country right now, what it means and how we move forward.
My response is yes, you're right. Absolutely. 1,000%. I have dedicated my life to the moral and spiritual dimensions of that crisis in an individual's life, as well as society's. And I came to the point of realization, partly because the society changed during the trajectory of my career, that you cannot separate the moral and the spiritual crisis from the economic crisis, and for all the reasons that you said. I'm older, and I think the older you are, you're sort of the keeper of the stories. When I was in my 20s, there was still a sense of hope. You didn't have to have a lot of money to be able to live in an apartment and just sort of have a sense that I could make it too if I work hard. In the 1970s, remember, we had a thriving middle class. And there was a sense, not that you said to yourself, oh, the society sets me up to succeed, but that was the kind of sense you got because you didn't feel thwarted. Remember, the average worker in the 70s could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford to send their kids to college. So those of us who were in our 20s looked forward to that and assumed that we could have that too. I watched this country change. I watched what trickle-down economics did. I watched what Reagan was doing. I watched the trajectory of what came to be hyper-capitalism, the dog-eat-dog world that it created, how so many people are living in a kind of economic survival that, of course, this perverts you psychologically and emotionally. Debt is crippling. We have 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt. So I saw it change, and I saw it change in all the ways that you said. And if you continue to try to address the spiritual and the moral crisis that is produced by so much of this atomization, which is produced by so much of hypercapitalism, then yes, you are doing good work. However, what I came to understand is that no amount of spiritual counseling or private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice. So we are exactly where you described, and America is in decline. Now the issue is for us to face that and to lift it back up. But we can't lift it back up unless we're willing to face what it is, and I thought you described it quite eloquently.
And what you said about, there's no amount of individual spiritual counseling or, psychologizing that can really bring us out of this as a society. That's something that I resonate with a lot. My wife is a therapist, and, she has to deal with a lot of the, a lot of the issues that our society creates in children as she goes and talks to children in schools in the area about their lives and the issues that they have to deal with. But she is, she's one person, and her team is only a few people, and there's only so much you can do when, after your hour-long counseling session, no matter how nice you can make them feel in the moment or how prepared you can make them in that moment, they have to go back to a a home that is impoverished, or a home with parents who don't have access to to good paying union jobs, right? Who are really on the margins of society, and that's something that I think that a lot of people and it's interesting. There was an Intercept article about you that they said that you kind of merged Bernie Sanders' politics with an early version of Jordan Peterson's self-help stuff. And that's where, people who really get into that Jordan Peterson type stuff, they just totally forget that there's a society around us, right? We are not, as much as society wants to atomize us and individualize us, we do live in a society, and things happen in a certain context, and we can't address it if we can't address people's individual problems if we don't address the societal problems.
Well, I don't think the comparison to Jordan Peterson is very correct, except maybe that very, very early phase when he was telling people to get up and not be a slacker and stuff like that. My work is more spiritual, and I believe in miracles, but you have to create the conditions for the miraculous to occur, and that relates to a society as much as it relates to an individual. And, I heard somebody say something the other day that I thought was really interesting. He said, I knew we were going down a bad path when I heard Ronald Reagan say, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? He said, because before then there had been a sense, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? So as long as we fail to reclaim a sense that this is a collective sickness. Individuals can make it. Individuals, we have gotten to a point, which is better than was true when I was growing up. We've gotten to a point where if you were talented enough, if you were brilliant enough, creative enough, if you have something special going on, no matter who you are, what race, what ethnicity, you probably can make it in America, which is different than when I was growing up. However, the point is you shouldn't have to be any of those things to live a dignified life in the United States. So even if that person was not a psychologist, even if that person was a minister or a rabbi or a mom or a particular coach and, helping kids because they can be great at sports, or that, helping kids that could be great at music or whatever. I think the point we have to face here is the rigging of the system in such a way that the vast majority of people do remain locked out of what is basically a prosperity machine of the U.S. economy. And that machinery should be available to anyone who works hard enough. And some of the people are locked out of that before they're even 10 years old.
And, and we're going to talk about some of the specific ways that you want to try to address these societal issues in a bit. But before we get to that, I'm interested in some of the way that you came to that kind of opinion and realization about the need to address these societal issues, and I wonder if it comes from your familial background, and this is something that I've seen on your website, and I've never seen anybody talk to you about it, which is kind of bizarre to me because it's fascinating to me. You say that your father was a labor organizer with the CIO, that he was part of the UAW's campaign to organize Ford plants in 1937. Your grandfather worked on Rock Island Railroad and took your father to hear Eugene Debs speak. Your brother worked for Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, and you say that played an important role in kind of shaping how you view the world. Can you talk to us about what it was like growing up in an environment like that, and how those people affected you?
Well, I've actually talked a lot about my father. I grew up in a very typical liberal Jewish democratic home, actually. But America was different in those days. I'll give you an example. My mother's family was very different politically than my father was. So there would be a family breakfast right in my grandmother's house. And my uncles would say to us things like, don't listen to your father, you'll never make any money. And then my father would say, don't listen to your uncle's kids. They will not survive the revolution. And then my mother would come in and say, okay, who wants roast beef? Who wants whitefish? That was America. We had these conversations. We weren't like that. This was America. These were the conversations on the table. And I think about that now and I think, wow, how different America is. As a matter of fact, I have felt, and I've heard other people say the same, I'm glad my parents didn't live to see what has happened to this country because it would have broken their hearts. And that's how I feel about both my parents. So yeah, when I was growing up, I remember my parents saying, if you ever cross a picket line, don't even think about coming home. But I think the most important anecdote is, I don't remember if I was in my 20s or my 30s, and I was with some girlfriend and some friend in the car. And I remember we were going somewhere and I saw a picket line and I said to her, oh, we can't go in. There's a picket line. And she said, oh, no, it's okay. You just kind of go around the line. And I looked at her and she said it with such innocence. I realized she was raised in a very different home. But it wasn't just that she was raised in a different home. She was raised at a different time. Because when I was growing up, and I grew up in Texas, and there were a lot of conservatives, obviously, even then, even though it was more of a Democratic state, it was just understood that you didn't cross a picket line. And I saw what happened. That goes back to what I said before. I saw this country change. I saw the demonization of labor that took place as part of the systematic rigging of our economy. The 80s was an amazing time of fundamental change, and we have to turn it back. That's all. We've had an aberrational chapter of American history. And I think that what I want to do as a candidate, but also what I want to do as president, is to help this country look in the mirror. Every generation of people individuates. Every individual does. And what do you do when you grow up? You're talking about your wife being a therapist. You look at your parents, you look at your family system, and you say, okay, what did my parents do that was right? What do I want to extend and pass that on to my kids and hopefully even do better? And you look at other things and you say, that stops here. I'm breaking the chain with that one. And that's what this generation of Americans needs to do. When I say generation, I mean all of us who are adults, whether you're 18 or 80. We need to recognize that this last really 50 years of trickle-down economics, neoliberalism, corporatism, hypercapitalism, it doesn't really matter what we call it. But for us to realize that a $50 trillion transfer of wealth, this focus on money for the stockholder as opposed to and at the expense of all other stakeholders, particularly the workers, has led to a devastating chapter that we are now in. And it is tanking us. It is literally tanking us. You cannot overestimate the role that economic despair plays in this mental health crisis. No, the mental health crisis is not just about what's going on in the brain. A lot of what's going on in the brain is because of what's going on in the world. That includes the state of our food. It includes the state of our water. It includes the state of our earth. It includes the state of our climate. It includes our foreign policy. It includes the fact that people can't afford an education or to send their kids. The fact that people can't afford their medicine. 18 million people who can't even afford to fulfill their prescriptions. People rationing their insulin, putting GoFundMe pages up on the internet so that they can afford to pay for operations that some greedy insurance company has said that they or their loved ones cannot have. This is not going to change unless we change it. We cannot look at this as simply fighting this issue here or this issue there. We're always playing whack-a-mole. It's an all systems breakdown. I agree with you that we need a political revolution, and I believe I agree with you that labor is crown jewel, but it goes across all sectors of society and all elements, and it does have to do with our realizing that it is now baked into the cake. The status quo will not disrupt itself. It's not a surprise to me that whether it's me or Bobby Kennedy or Cornel West, what is the one thing we all have in common? We're not part of that system. That system's not putting up a candidate who wants to really break the chain that binds us and that binds the majority of Americans economically. They're not going to do it. And everybody who's working within that system, even the most progressive voices, are locked in. They're not going to say it. They're not going to run for president saying it. Why? Their committee assignment might be taken away from them. Their chances for 28 will be diminished. It's got to be somebody coming in and saying, we're gonna change this thing. There needs to be an intervention, just like you intervene with a drug addict. There has to be an intervention. The status quo will not disrupt itself. We, the people, must disrupt the system. You cannot do that. You cannot do that without a revitalized labor movement, which is starting to happen, which is the same thing that happened in the first Gilded Age. And we're now in the second Gilded Age. And what you're seeing is the reiteration of this. It's amazing. You were talking about Max Alvarez, Christian Smalls, what's happening, the baristas, what's happening at Amazon, what's happening with the writer's strike in Los Angeles and New York. People are getting it. This is all part of an awakening that's going on. Now people need to be willing to make the transition, to realize it has to be an inside and an outside strategy. I'm not saying that electing a president or anyone else who gets it is going to be enough. But neither is it enough to just work on the outside. We need an inside-outside strategy. Those of us running for office need to support the movements, but the movements, I think, need to support the candidates who, if given the levers of power, would open the door and let them in.
And, I also think that a revitalized labor movement is key to really any sort of large-scale changes in our society, and that's how we've seen them come about in the past. And, as individuals, there is only so much we can do, like not crossing a picket line. That's really kind of the bare minimum that you talked about doing. But, as a president, like you said, there are ways that you can bring labor into the, in the door, so to speak, and support workers from that office. And, when it comes to labor, Biden has said that he's the most pro-union president of our lifetimes. And certainly, I think some leadership in our unions are going to say that. And I think to the extent that it is true, it's not so much that he's so great about labor. It's that the bar is just that low. He is willing to say union is a positive word. That's great. We've been pretty impressed here on this show with Jennifer Abruzzo, generally speaking, at the NLRB. But aside from that, there has really been a lack of action. And being in Alabama, I can't help but think, in the context of a president supporting labor, of the coal miners' strike in Brookwood that just ended after almost 2 years, where they were fighting against, international private equity companies that owned Warrior Met Coal. And the lack of action from the administration was really appalling to us. There were no statements made. I saw in Birmingham, the Department of Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, come to tout the infrastructure bill and be asked to his face for support from miners, and nothing came of that. Nothing came of that at all. He didn't even take the time to go a few steps down the road and be on the picket line with them. And, we expect that from Republicans here in Alabama, even though it's gross how they throw up coal miners in their ads and don't do anything for them when, they go up against BlackRock. But, we would like to be able to expect more from a Democratic administration. And so how would a Williamson administration have responded to a strike like that, one that ended up lasting, like I said, nearly 2 years before the union called the strike off without a contract?
There was a time when the Democratic Party did stand in unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. Now there's a new playbook. I think Obama perfected it, and Biden is very definitely in the same playbook. Say the right things. Say the right things. Say you really support labor, and then maybe they will be distracted and they won't recognize what you're actually doing. Do just enough. Do just enough. Raise the minimum wage for the federal workers. But then when you try to put it in the whole bill and the parliamentarian says, no, that's great, that's convenient, so we can just stop there. The railroad workers, who only wanted sick pay, Marty Walsh, what you just said. At what point are we going to end our codependent relationship with the Democratic elite and realize what's happened here? What they want to do is they want to do what they can on the periphery, but they won't go so far as to do anything that challenges the fundamental underlying corporate forces that make the continuation of all the suffering inevitable. So that's where I believe we need to get. Stop thinking that the Democratic elite is going to do anything for you on that level. What I would do as president is I would cancel every union busting company that the U.S. got a contract with every union busting company day one. I would make sure that not only every company, but every company that has a contract with a company that has a contract with the U.S. government has to give $15 an hour to its workers. And let's not forget, $15 an hour is not enough. In many cities in this country, it takes $24, $25 an hour to really be a living wage. And Franklin Roosevelt said that a company that does not pay its workers a living wage is a company that does not deserve to exist. Half the workers in this country cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment. 1/3 of American workers live on less than $15 an hour and can't afford a place to live. We have over 3 million people getting eviction notices every year. Many of these people are working people. Many of our homeless, people living in their cars. So the message here is we are way past time when incremental changes should be taken as acceptable. And like you said, the bar is so low. We're begging. We are saying to the Democratic elite, thank you for the cookie, because the Republicans only give you crumbs. But these Democratic elite establishment are giving you cookies. You can't live on a cookie either. You live on nourishing food. And nourishing food is a decent living wage for a dignified job. And that's why I have an economic Bill of Rights.
And you mentioned the rail workers just a moment ago, and that is something perhaps with a little bit more national resonance that has really disappointed a lot of union members, even people that are disposed to support Biden. And we've seen in our comments section rail workers telling us that they're going to be voting for Trump in 2024 because of the strike breaking that Joe Biden engaged in with the support of Democrats in the Congress. And so, we would disagree with that electoral strategy about voting for Trump. But, that's Biden's fault, right? Because how do you he has not even given us anything to work with. If I'm talking to a rail worker and let's say we live in a world where Jacob wants to try to convince them to vote for Biden in a general election, he just hasn't given me anything to work with, particularly for rail workers. And so, can we assume that a Williamson administration would not engage in that kind of behavior during negotiations like that?
I'm running against him. I'm his opponent. That's the whole point. And if you don't, I firmly believe there are a lot of people like those who have told you, to hell with us, I'm voting for Trump. What I'm saying to you is I don't want to say that the president wouldn't win again because I don't want to sort of put that in the air, but then vote for someone different. We have this codependent relationship with continuing to talk about what the Democrats are offering. What they're offering is not enough. It has not been enough for us, and it is not enough to win in 2024. Let's talk about the option. So when you say, what would the Democratic Williamson administration do? Yes, we would make sure that we pass the PRO Act. Yes, we would cancel the contracts with the union busting companies. Yes, Franklin Roosevelt said, it has become obvious to me, he said clear, that we must become fairly radical for a generation. Now, when I say radical, I mean radically American. But the Democratic Party is trying to have it both ways. And I don't believe the Democratic Party should be trying to have it both ways. The Democratic Party today is not the Democratic Party, but the Democratic elite, establishment elites in the Democratic Party today are what the Republicans were when I was growing up.
It definitely, I've seen flyers from young Republican committees talking about, the importance of going to your union meeting. And that's just something that you would never see here. And in fact, when Tuberville was running against Doug Jones, he took out an ad in a local newspaper here saying that Tuberville would stand up to big labor. As if this is something that people are concerned about here in rural North Alabama, is having a senator that
if only.
Right. Yeah, I would love to have a big labor in this country that actually pulls the strings. And
go back to when Biden won in 2020. You know who wanted to be his Secretary of Labor, don't you?
Yes.
And he chose Marty Walsh. That says everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that we can never say often enough. Howard Schultz was Hillary Clinton's reported pick to be Secretary of Labor, and we see what Howard Schultz is doing with his workers right now. And one more question on labor that I'm interested in your take on is that over the past several decades that you've been talking about the rise of whatever we want to call it, hyper-capitalism, neoliberalism, we've seen law enforcement organizations at the federal and state levels be chronically underfunded. And I'm not talking about the police, the people that are going to pull you over when you're going down the street or, harass you if they don't like the way that you look. I'm talking about the agencies that enforce laws that benefit workers at the expense of bosses, organizations like the Department of Labor, like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, like the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Labor Relations Board. Every one of these organizations have devastating numbers that they can reel off to you. And the summary of all of it is that they have more work than they ever have in the history of their organization, and they have less resources than they ever have in the history of their organization. So how would you make it a priority for Congress to fully fund these organizations?
President presents her budget. And when listen, no matter who the president is, you hope for members of the House who support your agenda. You hope for a Senate that supports your agenda. Obviously, people need to not only, if the agenda of what I am suggesting is to someone's liking, then you not only have to support my candidacy, but support on a primary level more congressional and senatorial candidates as well. Remember, the crushing of progressive candidates occurs not only on a presidential level, but definitely on a congressional level as well. So obviously, the goal here ultimately is to get enough people in Congress who will actually support the kind of agenda in which there will be more funding for the NLRB, there will be more funding for the EPA, there will be more funding for the FDA, there will be more funding for these things that actually support people. Underfunding these agencies, capturing these agencies by corporate forces is the agenda of the hyper-capitalist neoliberal forces. So having a president who gets that and will say that and will lay it down and will tell the American people what's really going on is important, but it's not the only thing. So yes, getting a president in there who will say it like it is and say, we need this money, and will actually expose when that money is not giving. We'll say it in something like a State of the Union, say, well, what we really need is more money for the NLRB. What we really need is more money for OSHA. What we really need is more money for the Labor Department. But my fellow Americans, we couldn't get it from this Congress. Why? Because they're not working for your health, safety, and well-being so much as they're working for their corporate donors. We need a president who would say that in the State of the Union and then see what happens.
I appreciate your time here, and we'll wrap up with what I see as the two big elephants in the room regarding your candidacy. And, for other policy specifics, like I said, you've been on several programs, given, speeches, and you have a really detailed website. I would recommend folks check that out. But to wrap up here, I want to give you some time to address those two. And the first one is I think your past history as something of a spiritual advisor or a self-help guru, which many people actually like. We have even had some listeners come to us and say that the reason they're interested in your campaign is from your appearances on Oprah and reading your books and how much you have helped them in the past. But others have the opposite reaction. They're kind of turned off by it. And we've had other folks just on the opposite end of the spectrum reach out and say that questioning your candidacy because of those very things. And I'll just read you one comment that we got because I think it's representative, and I think it'll be helpful for you to be able to address that directly. And this person told us, initially, we really liked her because one of the videos she did was a really good one about America's mental health crisis. And she said a lot of really good things in it that I'm not used to hearing politicians say. But ultimately, we got a little weirded out by her because we learned that she's apparently into magical healing crystals. And I'm fairly certain that's not the case, but that's an opinion that's out there. And other really bizarre and ethically questionable forms of alternative medicine. How would you talk to a person that has come by one way or another to that opinion of you?
It's a shame that people, so where did they get that information? I mean, hello. So I have 14 books that are out there. There are so many videos of my lectures, etc. You'll never find in any of those books any talk about healing crystals. You'll never find in any of my talks that you'll see on the video of me using healing crystals or magical thinking to heal people. Why do I know that? Because it doesn't exist. Now, let's be real about the kinds of things that you and I have been talking about on this program today. We're very aware, and I would think that the person who wrote you that note would be aware that there's tremendous institutional resistance to conversations like you and I are having actually being translated into effective political power. So they say it's a form of character assassination. It's a form of creating whatever narrative would throw fairy dust in people's eyes. So ask me about something I've said, because I've never said anything about healing crystals, and I've never said anything about magical thinking. So how do I, it's kind of like one of those, when was the last time you beat your wife?
Right.
How can I defend myself for something that didn't happen? And I know that those narratives have been created, and those narratives are created, and it's just ridiculous, but it's not ridiculous because people hear it and think it's true. I think there are a lot of people who would like to think that they are not vulnerable to disinformation. Sure are when it comes to me. But, like they say, do your own research. Actually read my books. Pick up any of my books and see if I say anything like that. Look at any of my texts, any of my videos. There's so many of them out there. See if I say anything like that, and you won't find it.
And I think that one good place actually to kind of see somebody stumbling over trying to accuse you of that is your interview with Sean Hannity, because he read a quote from one of your books or speeches or something that was said in different words, but is actually very theologically Christian about not feeling at home in this world. And I remember growing up in the church and singing a hymn to that effect about, I'm not home here and all this stuff. And you said, I don't know. I thought that's something that a lot of Christians would actually agree with. And he kind of stumbled over himself and was like, oh, yeah, now that I think about it, you're right. Actually, that is something I agree with. So never mind. And so
something I wanted to point out was that that is the irony. If you read my books, I speak about the religious and spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious systems. But they're all pretty traditional. I mean, my spiritual beliefs are pretty traditional. We must love one another, be merciful, forgive, be compassionate, walk humbly. That's pretty traditional stuff.
I would tend to agree. And so the last thing that we'll let you answer, and then we'll let you go. We appreciate your time. Is and that's the other elephant in the room that I think is more important to me, and even for folks who like you, it is, the long shot nature of your campaign. Being a union member, union endorsements are important to me, and many unions have actually already endorsed Biden, which is something that we, had a segment about on our show saying that was a bad idea. And the ones that haven't aren't really likely to endorse anybody else in the primary. And so what are you doing to court union endorsements, or at least encourage them to kind of stay out of the race? Have you received any union endorsements yet? And why should union members and other working folks donate time and money, their limited resources, to your campaign? What is the theory to win, I guess, or at least affect change? Is there one policy in particular that maybe you're hoping to get Biden to adopt because of this campaign? I'm interested in your response to that.
Biden will not adopt more pro-labor policies than he has now. What I would hope is that people would do their civic responsibility, look at the agenda of the president, look at my agenda, clearly on my website, marianne2024.com, as it pertains to labor and everything else, an economic bill of rights and so forth. Look at the agenda of anyone else who's running, and then make a mind and heart-filled decision. The person who will win is the person who is supported. I mean, Donald Trump supposedly had no chance of winning back in 2016. The issue is, we have been trained in this country to limit our political imaginations. She can't win. Of course they want you to think that. That's kind of like, she uses healing crystals. I'll win if I get the votes. I'll get the votes if I'm supported. So I've heard people say that. I heard some environmental activists said something similar. A friend of mine who is big in the environmental movement, said, how can you support Biden after he approved the Willow Project? How can you support Biden after he gave more drilling permits than even Trump did? And so this person said, well, what else have we got? I felt so erased. I felt so invisible. I've said I would cancel the Willow Project on day one. It's a mind thing that's been done to all of us. And part of claiming our power is using it. This is a primary, by the way. This is a primary. So if you vote for a person, if you want to, if you think that Biden is going to ultimately win anyway, which, if you want to look at reasonable predictive factors, that would be, understandable. Vote for someone in the primary who, should they get enough votes, even if they do not defeat him, by standing for the policies you believe in, will have more influence. So when you say to me, how do I expect to agitate? How do I expect to influence the president? My question goes back to the voter. How do you expect to do it? I'm doing it by running. By you voting for me, you are upping the conversation that the president would then have to look at and go, wow, a lot of people want that agenda.
I think that's reasonable, and we've had internationals of local unions who advertise and sponsor the show who have endorsed Biden, and so I can imagine that there might be some consternation with this interview, perhaps, but I hope people will listen to it with an open mind, and like you said, do your civic responsibility. I think that it is important for people to actually know who and what they're voting for, and what the ramifications of that is going to be. So Marianne Williamson, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, I think it's great. I think what you're doing is great. I agree with everything, that you guys were saying at the very beginning of this conversation. America's in trouble, and it's like a ship that's listing to the side. We need universal health care. We need tuition-free college and tech schools. We need free childcare. We need paid family leave. We need a guaranteed living wage. We need a guaranteed sick pay. We need an economic bill of rights, but we're not going to have these things until and unless we support candidates who stand for them, and stand for them passionately and vocally. And if all of us work together, we can have that, but we have to make it happen.
Marianne Williamson, candidate for the presidential nomination in the Democratic Party. Appreciate your time, and
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
All right, folks, we appreciate you listening, and there has been a lot of conversation in the chat, and hope you understand that we are not that we weren't able to get to all that. We had some questions that we felt were important that we wanted to ask her. Appreciate your
we had a
patience.
whole lot of questions. Believe
Yeah.
me, we had plenty of questions. Just we could have done many more. So there was a lot we didn't talk about. For example, foreign policy is an issue that I really like to talk about. We didn't really get into, but maybe another time and maybe down the road. But I really appreciate everyone who's been tuning in this morning. Appreciate your time, and like Jacob said, I hope everyone just listens with an open mind, and that's why we talk to candidates on this show. We've talked to a diverse cast of characters on this show, everyone from Republicans to communists and everything in between. So we try to have a diverse crew of folks that come and speak to us so that we can just hear what folks have to say and try to have dialogue that's helpful and relevant to working people in the South.
Yeah. I will, during the break, I'll be going through the chat and seeing if there is anything in particular that I think would be worth us responding to once we get into overtime.
Yeah.
I think that would that may be helpful. So if you are, if you're particularly interested in seeing us address your question, then go ahead and drop it in the chat now with, maybe do caps lock and all caps and say question, and then have your question, and we'll we might can address it in overtime, which is the second half of our program where we are off the radio and free from the shackles of the FCC censors. So if you want to check out the second half of our show, you can find us on YouTube and Facebook, where we're going to be continuing for another hour and a half after we wrap up on the radio. But
we have two great interviews coming up in overtime also. Two guests in overtime this time. So it's going to be a great one.
Yeah, going to be a good one. We do have 30 more minutes on the radio, so we are going to take a break and be right back and talk about a real freak attorney who is making as much as Nick Saban to defend our unconstitutional prisons. So that's a story that has really got my knickers in a twist this week. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBEW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBEW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBEW558.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Do you work in an auto manufacturing plant? Are you tired of taking pride in your work without getting the respect you deserve? Consider joining the fight to unionize. Auto workers across the industry are coming together because with a union, we can negotiate for the pay, benefits, and security that we deserve and can help sustain our families. In union plants, workers bargain for long-term wage increases, competitive bonuses, and more affordable benefits. You can join the growing wave of organizing today. Find out more and contact us at Uniting Auto Workers on Facebook or contact UAW Region 8 in Lebanon, Tennessee by going to www.uawregion8.net. That's www.uawregion8.net. A better future is ours.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can send us a text message. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. We do appreciate the $25 super chat from Bigelow. That's great. Love that. And anything that we get goes to helping continue the show and working on trying to bring more attention to working people's struggles here in Alabama. We have broken a few union-related stories here in the local area, and the more money that we have, the better able we will be to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, and it costs money to be on the radio, and we would love to be expanding our radio footprint. I think that would be cool if we could get on more FM, AM stations. And so whatever folks do contribute, it goes a long way. We couldn't do it without the individual contributions. I mean, you all hear the ads. You hear that we do have sponsors who run advertisements on the show, which, we couldn't do it without them either. So really, it's a collection of those revenue sources that help fund the show and help us be on the air. And we think it's important to be on the air on FM radio, including in different, we're on pretty diverse stations, right? We're on a very conservative talk news station. We're one of, if not the only show probably on VNN that is from the left, I would guess. I don't know, Jacob, you're more familiar with local talk radio than I am, but I'm not sure that they have any more.
On WVNN?
Right. I'm not sure that they
absolutely.
have anything quite like us on WVNN.
No, definitely not. I mean, even across the state, there's not there. I think there may be one progressive radio show in Birmingham. Maybe. I remember it being on years ago, but I don't know if it's still on.
So we try to bring something different, right? And I hear from people who don't necessarily love our politics, but who appreciate what we're doing because it is something different.
Look, the freaks with billions of dollars wouldn't be funding this kind of stuff if it didn't have some effect. Like, of course, they've got more money than they know what to do with, and so there's a lot of money wasted. I was just talking to Adam this morning about how Koch-funded 1819 News is spending $1,000 a month on a gold check mark on Twitter. I mean, what weirdos, right?
Right. I would love to have $1,000 a month extra just to pay some writers to get some good stories out there.
Yeah.
Right? Cool.
Here's a commitment that we will make. If we ever get a donor that gives us $1,000 a month, we will not spend it on a gold check mark on Twitter.com. So that's very true. That's our commitment to you. We will spend it doing actual things. But it wouldn't. So they'll waste money on stuff, but radio, even as much as its influence is declining, it still has a lot of influence, and there is still influence to be had there. I mean, the Huntsville radio market is enough to prop up 3 full-time conservative radio hosts, right? And so, the local capitalists and the people who fund these type of folks, they don't do it for no reason, right? There's a reason that they do that, and so it's effective. So we that's why we want to be on the radio and why we're willing to spend a little bit of money to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being on diverse stations, right? We're
on
conservative
stations,
station.
black stations, community stations. So,
I think that's important.
$2 super chat from Straw McCallum Solidarity from South Carolina. Appreciate it. So yeah, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the prison defender. There's this guy, a private attorney. He's don't even work for the state. Bill Lunsford. Bill Lunsford is getting over $7 million a year to defend our unconstitutional prison system from lawsuits by the Department of Justice and other various parties, I think. And that is as much as Nick Saban makes, basically. He just got a raise to 9-point-something million, but before that he was making 7.7 million a year. And at least with Nick Saban, you can say, like, okay, look, I think he's probably worth $7 million.
He's by far one of the greatest coaches in college football history.
He brings in way more than $7 million in economic revenue to the state of Alabama, I think, and I think so. I don't have a huge problem with him making that money. I think that the students also contribute to the amount of money that UA brings in, and I think they should get some of that and a lot more of that. But the idea that we are spending as much money as we do as a state on Nick Saban, the best college football coach in history, probably, bringing millions of dollars into the state every year. We're spending that same amount of money on some freak who is willing to defend, because you have to be a freak to defend our prison system, right? You just can't do it. We just froze somebody to death a couple of months ago. right? This is not a defensible prison system. I've heard conservative legislators be on the radio talking about how our prison system is worse than third world countries and we really do need to address it. And then they go down to Montgomery and they don't do anything about it. But the idea that you would be willing to defend Alabama's prison system is like, I mean, you're a freak, right? You're a freak.
It's violent, it's cruel, it's dehumanizing, it's unconstitutional every day that it's in operation. And, you know, what are the taxpayers of Alabama getting for these millions of dollars? Because for me, as an Alabama citizen, as a taxpayer, I would want the state of Alabama to send a lawyer to go meet with the DOJ and say, how do we fix this?
Yeah.
And let's start fixing it.
Yeah, this contract is for 2 years. The upcoming contract is for 2 years, and it's for $20-something million. And imagine, you know, $20 million is not going to fix our prison system, but we could do something with $20 million.
Right. You could hire quite a few social workers. Right. You could hire quite a few more probation officers. You could hire quite a few more, you know, folks to work in mental health in the prison system for that amount of money. And again,
you could give people houses so they don't end up on the streets and then filling our jails, right? How many houses could $20 million build? How many people would that keep off the street if we created $20 million of housing?
So, yeah, I think that if I'm not mistaken here, Mr. Lunsford receives more in his payments from the state of Alabama than affordable housing does as a policy, as an initiative. Like, just more money given to Mr. Lunsford than is spent by the Alabama legislature, you know, devoted to affordable housing. It's wild. I recommend folks check out the article by Josh Moon that was posted this week on the Alabama Political Reporter. I'm glad he caught that and put that out there because it kind of, I'd not heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly hadn't heard about it. And, you know, that's something that I think is really interesting. You've got a guy making $7 million a year defending a system that is so obviously and egregiously bad that there's no questions about. Like, no one's out here saying that ADOC is okay. No one's out here saying that Alabama's prisons are okay. I mean, it is universally agreed upon they are cruel and inhumane and overfilled.
Right.
Like you said, that even conservative legislators are willing to acknowledge this.
Right.
They won't do anything about it because that may actually require some criminal justice reform. It might require funding programs that might help people. And I know helping people is a really, you know, big no-no in Montgomery. But it's just, it's very egregious. And, you know, I'm glad he interviewed Chris England for this, who is an attorney as well as a legislator. Because he asked, what are we defending? And I think that's a good question. What is our $7+ million a year going to defend? Because it looks like, from my angle as an ordinary citizen who pays taxes, that my money is going to defend a cruel, inhumane system that is warehousing way too many people. More people inside the state of Alabama are locked up than almost any other place on earth.
Yeah.
Okay, all those bad countries I'm supposed to be scared of. I'm supposed to be grateful I live in America and not those really bad, terrible countries, right? But Alabama is incarcerating more people inside our borders than those bad countries are. So
yeah, the United States of America incarcerates more black folks today than South Africa did at the height of apartheid. And Alabama has a higher incarceration rate than almost any other state in the country. And we cage more human beings than the Soviet Union did in the gulags. Right? And we're always told that the Soviet Union is the big bad, that they are literally the worst regime to ever, you know, to ever exist.
That's
true. And we cage more people than the Soviet Union? Than Maoist China?
Yeah, so then you have to ask, okay, so do you want me to believe that the people of Alabama are just that much more sick and degenerate and criminal?
Yeah.
And in which case, is it really Sweet Home Alabama?
Yeah.
But, you know...
And then that's before we even, you know, this is just the system that puts people in these prisons. We're not even talking about the conditions that these people live in the prisons, and the lack of rehabilitation.
Which are so disturbing and disgusting. I got a chance to hear a presentation from Alabama Appleseed earlier this spring. And if you're not following Alabama Appleseed, you should be, because they're doing really, really important work in this area, specifically with criminal justice reform and dealing with the prison situation here in Alabama. And it was just shocking to hear some of the stories, to get some of the statistics from them. The state of Alabama's prisons are dire. Dire. I mean, disturbing. It's a national disgrace. It is a national disgrace. And so, you know, here's a gentleman making $7 million a year to defend that.
Yeah,
it's a shame.
And you know, some lawyers have this idea that, oh, you know, you can defend anybody for any reason, and we're not talking about a public defender defending a murderer, which is a murderer's having defense is a constitutional right, and it's an important constitutional right.
And we believe in due process.
But
as unionists, I mean,
but the Alabama Department of Corrections is not a person. They do not have constitutional rights, and if we even say that we do need somebody to defend them, which maybe we do just for due process, I don't know. I'm really skeptical of that, because I think the state could just say, yeah, you know what? You're right. We agree, because on the facts of the case, there's no way to argue that we're not violating the Constitution. And so we're just going to do the thing to repair our prison system. But
so
even if we
stop breaking the law.
Yeah. If we didn't do that, though, we don't have to pay somebody $7 million a year to defend this. And this freak doesn't have to sell himself for $7 million a year to do this, right? This is somebody who could take, who is experienced enough and has the connections that he could take any case that he wanted, and he is choosing with his limited time and resources to defend the Alabama prison system. A freak this guy is.
Yeah, I mean, just for the record, he moved from the Maynard Cooper law firm to Butler Snow, so one of the most powerful firms to another one of the most powerful firms in the state of Alabama. So I'd be inclined to agree with you that he could probably pick his clients here, and has chosen this one. But, you know, for $7 million a year, it's understandable why he's doing it. You know, I personally like to be able to sleep at night. But, you know, some people... you know, have different morals.
This is the last thing we'll talk about here, and Infinite Content brought it up in the chat with a $5 super chat. Adam and Jacob, the Supreme Court actually did a good thing for Alabama in a gerrymandering case. Is Mercury in super retrograde this week? And it
took us all by surprise. I think
it definitely took us by surprise. But you know, I mean, on the merits of the case, the thing is, the thing makes sense. You know, I mean, the non-white population in the state of Alabama when the 7th congressional district was created was only 27% of the population. That's the whole non-white population, not even just the black population. So the whole non-white population was 27%. And today, the non-white population is 37% in the state of Alabama. And so it is just the case that, minorities who are protected by the Voting Rights Act in states across the country, not just Alabama, they do need a second congressional district at this point because their population has increased relative to the population of the state. And so they need a second congressional district to have an opportunity to elect somebody of their choosing. And so, you know, obviously the facts of the case are in what, in favor of deciding against Alabama on the case. But that's never stopped the Supreme Court before, you know.
Right,
I mean,
that's
when
the surprising thing.
Yeah, when they overturned the pre-clearance stuff back in, I think, 2014, is that when it happened? But whenever they overturned the pre-clearance, they did that after Congress reapproved the Voting Rights Act, including the pre-clearance, by 98%, 99%. You know, And they just said, and so they just said, well, Congress just approved this by 98%. But I interpret that they're really just scared to do this, and actually they don't want to do this. And so I'm going to overrule the 98% vote of the Congress of the United States and overturn something that was just approved by them, being the pre-clearance standard, which stated that for states and cities and municipalities, states in the South aren't the only ones who had to have pre-clearance. There were some places in New York that had a history of discrimination. But if you were an area that had a history of discrimination and racism and white supremacy and stuff like this, then you had to get pre-clearance to change the voting rules, which makes sense and and which Congress agreed to before they immediately in the years preceding the overturning of that by the Supreme Court, by the activist judiciary. And so that's what a lot of people expected them to do this time. But they didn't. They abided by the law, which is kind of surprising, but glad we'll take a win where we can get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's going to have a ripple effect because it's my understanding that the same person who created Alabama's now illegal maps also created the electoral maps for places like Auburn and I believe Tuscaloosa, and perhaps some other jurisdictions across the state. So, it'll be interesting to see if those end up in court, if they're not already. It'll be interesting to see, how this shakes up things politically. You're talking
my
about
understanding
maybe
is
second of the 7 congressional districts being actually competitive. Right. So that's interesting. Now, there's a lot more you could get in there in terms of what that would look like, but it is nice that the Supreme Court actually did something that they were supposed to do for a change and listen to common sense. So, because I think, like you said, the facts of the case were just so obvious, but that's never been a tell with this particular Supreme Court that is dominated by extremist right-wing judges.
Yeah, well, just look at the Glacier Northwest opinion that they released the week before, which clearly flies in the face of the National Labor Relations Act and the Constitution, but they just ignored the what the law says to give capital a win. So
yeah, absolutely. And last thing we'll say on Alabama as we wrap up is that the legislature did finish. So we can all breathe a sigh of relief that the legislature is no longer in session.
Yeah,
no more damage can be done.
Yeah, they are done legislating all over us for this year.
Yeah,
so.
There was good, there was bad, there was ugly, a lot of bad and ugly. One good bit of news is that I've reported a lot on HB 209, which would have criminalized absentee voting assistance. That bill died, just like the Divisive Concepts bill. Also dead. So good news.
Good news. So we'll go ahead and do our plugs, and we'll wrap up before we go into overtime, which is, like I said earlier, the second half of the program where we are online only. We will continue streaming for another hour and a half on Facebook and YouTube, and we will be free from the shackles of the FCC censors, so you definitely want to catch those conversations. And Adam also has Shop Talk every Thursday morning, typically at 9:30 a.m., but this week it's going to be at 10:30 a.m. because of scheduling conflicts. So definitely tune into that. You've got a good guest booked, and we'll talk about that as we head into overtime. So make sure that you check that out. Bookmark our website, tvlr.fm. And donate to us, tvlr.fm/donate. We could always use the money, and we try to be conservative with the money that we get and responsible with it, because we do understand that it is not easy for working people to give to give from their meager earnings, right?
No,
so we really appreciate your time and resources. We're going to be heading into overtime. We're going to be speaking to Jesse Hagopian about education and playing a pre-recorded interview of David Van Deusen, the president of the Vermont Labor Federation. Really looking forward to hearing that conversation and responding to a couple of things that we got in the chat. So stay tuned, folks. You're still listening to the Valley Labor Report, and for the folks on the radio, we'll see you next week. All right, folks, we are off the radio now. Appreciate your staying with us. like I said, we're about to head into overtime, so stay tuned online to the live stream on YouTube or Facebook, and we will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral air. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral air. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. Sorry about being a little bit late. Back to my seat. I underestimated or overestimated, I guess, the amount of time that we had in that break.
I'll make a note of it, and we'll just put it in your file and keep it trucking.
There you go, progressive discipline.
Right.
That was my verbal warning.
Yeah, Joe, if you're listening, make a note. Put it in your file.
There you go. Yeah. So the Lenny Power says TVLR should call the overtime hour the hour or so the FCC won't allow you to hear. That would be some good branding.
Yeah, we actually don't cuss that much, though.
We don't.
It happens occasionally. Yeah, usually.
I do try not to cuss, even during overtime, just because I do want to try to keep it, generally family friendly and stuff like that,
Right.
and mom friendly, just in case my mother ever listens to it.
Right, your mom and them.
Yeah.
Of course. But occasionally, the rants are free flowing and it just happens.
Yeah. So we did want to take a little bit here at the top of overtime to respond to some of the to take a look at some of the stuff in the chat, and I think we're going to mainly be generally responding to kind of the tenor of the conversation, but we'll start with this specific conversation. Having read this specific question, having read her policies, how would you compare her platform to Bernie's? The same, more progressive, less progressive? I would think probably less. A little bit. That's the general vibe I get, although not materially so. The thing about
I would say it's very comparable.
It's definitely comparable.
Based on my recollection of Bernie's platform from 2020, and being a little bit involved there, and from what I've gathered from Marianne's 2024, I would say it's in the same ballpark. It's very comparable. I mean, you might can find certain issues, some differences on particular issues, but I would say it's very, very comparable. I mean, and the fact that people like Harvey J.K. are working with Marianne on that platform and campaign, I think speaks to the general tenor, the general progressive vibe she's going for.
Yeah, and the thing about that is that like you said, the platform is very, very similar to Bernie's. There are things that may be different here and there, but not materially so. Like I said, it may be a little bit less progressive, but not materially so, I would say. The thing is, for me, the platform is great, and I'm probably going to vote for her in the primary just because I do want to be able to, in some small way, voice my disappointment for the Biden administration, in the Biden administration. And I think that, like she said, giving more votes to an opposition candidate is a way to do that. And so that's probably what I'm going to do. But the thing that's concerning to me about her candidacy, and this was kind of mentioned in the chat, is the lack of a movement behind her. Whereas, Bernie had, there were some unions and there were some organizations that was behind the Bernie campaign. Although maybe not at the beginning. And so, perhaps there's still a chance for something to come out of the Marianne campaign or to bolster it. But I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah. I mean, my general take on it is, do you want someone running with that kind of politics and that platform? And my answer would be, well, yeah, I do. Right. I would rather there be someone running with that than not. And that's what frustrates me so much in Alabama is the lack of choice, right? I'm lucky if there's even a Democrat to vote for. And if typically the only candidate is an extreme far-right Republican. If you're lucky, maybe you have a Democrat who is basically a moderate conservative.
But last year, you were more often and more likely to see a libertarian running against
right. And so I think it's important. I am like I think most of our audience in that electoral politics is not like the be-all, end-all for me. There's a reason why we're a union talk radio show and not a progressive politics talk radio show.
Absolutely.
I know the two overlap, but ultimately we believe the labor movement and more broadly the organizing of the working class is the goal, right? Is the key to actual change in this country. That said, I would rather there be candidates running with policies I like than there not be those candidates. And so I'm glad that someone is running on, basically Bernie's platform this year, since Bernie is not running. I have no illusions about, how the results are going to shake out, more than likely. I'm also interested in Cornel West. I'm a longtime reader of Cornel West. I've been a big fan of his work. I'm not very familiar with the People's Party. You've told me some things, Jacob, that has me quite concerned, So I'm a little sus on the choice of the People's Party, if that was necessarily the right move. But again,
it was absolutely not the right move.
So I'll take your word, and I'll take your word for that, because I'm not informed enough to know one way or the other. But what I'll say is, generally I've been a fan of Cornel's career, and again, I'm appreciative that there are people running who are trying to articulate some version of working class politics. Politics that is by and for working people. We can debate on the specifics on how well each candidate is doing that, but we absolutely need conversations about why are we the only developed country on earth without paid sick leave and without guaranteed health care and without guaranteed pre-K, and why we need those conversations happening. And to the extent that people like Marianne Williamson or Cornel West running, it advances that's good. I'm not going to take a lot of time and attention and money from my personal life and devote it to the 2024 election. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, this is probably the extent of our involvement with the Marianne
campaign. I'm happy to have conversations, on the show to inform people, so we can all have our, decisions and make our decisions. I'm more interested, to the extent that I'm interested in electoral politics, I'm more interested in at the bottom up, state and local. And someone mentioned in the chat that, we need a third party in Alabama.
Yeah.
Something like that is honestly more intriguing to me than the presidential contest, because I think there's more opportunity to actually make a difference there, because it is starting local. And, I don't know. I feel personally like I got a little more invested in Bernie's runs in 2016 and 2020 than I should have. And I knew better, as someone who is a materialist and, kind of approaches politics from that perspective. I sort of knew better, but it was hard not to get sucked in anyway. I'm not sucked into the 2024 campaign by any means. And so, again, I appreciate, what Marianne is discussing. I think she has a lot of good things to say. I understand people have their reservations about her. I understand that specifically. I also understand just being reserved and kind of skeptical of electoral politics, period. And I think that's more so our camp. And that's why, we're interested in it. We'll talk about it. We'll try to have the best informed decisions. But ultimately, we think building power in the working class, organizing unions, building community power, that's really our goal and how we're going to make things better. It's not just electing people. I think Marianne's right that some inside-outside game is necessary, right? I mean, if you're totally working outside, you're sticking to nothing but union organizing and community organizing, and you're never entering into the electoral arena, you may be missing some opportunities there.
Right.
But generally speaking, the problem in American politics is that we put way too much into the electoral side of things while abandoning labor organizing and community organizing. So, that's kind of my general thoughts about it. I appreciate the diverse perspectives that people have had. We've had people who were not happy we interviewed her. We've had people who were thrilled that we were interviewing her. So I think it's just interesting, to always hear from folks about what they have to say. And, there's always some haters. So there's always folks who will surprise you. So
But yeah, that's kind of our take. There was another question about where she stands on the Palestinian issue, I'm not sure that may be a good one to try to dig around and see if she's got one. But understand certainly, Will, that's a big issue for you. And you said I don't think she's that good when it comes to human rights for them, and that may be the case. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen, but
yeah, and
something I'd want to look into.
I was interested in foreign policy as well, and we didn't really have time just to get into that. But I'm going to say this part that I was going to mention had we gotten to it, which is that one of the key powers of the presidency is in foreign policy. And as someone committed to peace and internationalism and opposed to war and empire, I'm disturbed by both political parties. And I'm disturbed by their warmongering. I'm disturbed by their imperialism, their relationship to defense contractors and the military-industrial complex that, I know we're not really supposed to talk about. Both parties seem committed to adversarial relations, whether that's with China or Russia or both. Neither party seems serious about working with the international community to bring peace, whether that's in Ukraine or in the Middle East or elsewhere. Neither party wants to reckon with the consequences of American foreign policy over the years, whether that's U.S. sanctions or covert actions or the support of oligarchies or the support of Israeli apartheid, for example. These policies have real consequences for real human beings.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're not going to have a lot of good conversations in the presidential campaign about that, I don't believe.
Yeah.
Certainly not from mainstream media and mainstream politics.
Yeah. D.L. Sendero says, I regret to say it, but in my honest opinion, running on the People's Party ticket will be his undoing regarding Cornel West. And I think that's kind of, as far as this race, and that's really the thing that I don't understand, is I think that if he had run just as an independent or even in the Democratic primary, and I tend to be kind of Libby on that, and I think that running in the Democratic Party maybe makes more sense typically than an independent run. But like we've talked about, it's not something that I spend a lot of time on.
Well, I still love Cornel.
I still
love Cornel. I'm still going to listen to him talk and listen to what he has to say.
Yeah.
And
TSAL Collective said, the reason I like Wes is he believes every word he says, even if it feels trite or ugly in our culture. Him being misused as a cultural symbol won't hurt him, but it will burn out the clock. Regarding getting Cornel on the debate stage, I think that would be a very funny debate, and I'd be very much interested in seeing it. So
absolutely. If you want to switch gears here, I believe Jesse is in the Zoom and ready for us, so we can go ahead and get started there. Let me get Jesse on the screen for us. Awesome. Jesse, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So last week we talked with a teacher organizer in Iowa City, along with Deborah from Zen Education Project. And we talked about the Teach Truth Day of Action that is happening today, June 10th. So if folks missed that conversation last week, definitely check it out. But Jesse, could you tell us what is the Teach Truth Day of Action that's happening today?
Yeah, it's an exciting day all across the country. Parents, students, teachers, community members, caregivers, mentors, counselors, everybody who cares about education and youth are rallying from my hometown here in Seattle down to Miami and everywhere in between. People are fed up with the attack on education, the attack on our youth, the attack on our teachers. Almost every state in this country and many local school districts have passed bills that try to require educators to lie to students about structural racism, to say that it wasn't foundational to the United States, right? Even though our nation was built on a genocide of Native people and the enslavement of Africans, there are laws that say you can't call that structural racism now. And these laws are now applied to almost half of public school students in the United States. And it's really a scary moment we're in, and that's why we're fighting back today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen that right here in Alabama. Thank goodness the worst bill that we had that was called Divisive Concepts Ban, which is about what it sounds like. It died on the last day of the legislative session this week, so we're very happy about that. But, you know, the sponsor of that bill actually said it was necessary because teachers were proselytizing and sexualizing children. And
outrageous.
You know, I think that's the sort of outrageous rhetoric that's been attached to this. So Jesse, tell us a little bit about your involvement. What have you been doing with this Teach Truth Day of Action, both locally and just in general?
Yeah, well, I've been a teacher my whole career, from the time I was 20, and I have most recently taught at my alma mater, Garfield High School in Seattle. I'm now working with the Zen Education Project, and we provide free downloadable people's history lessons to educators in every state. We have over 150,000 educators who have registered at our website. And these are educators that want to teach beyond the textbook, that know that the corporate textbooks that exist in this country far too often erase the contributions of Black people, people of color, of women, of LGBTQ people. And we want to center those voices that have been marginalized. And so we have lessons to teach about every social movement we can, and really help students understand the power that youth have played in social movements throughout history so that they can be part of the struggles today for a more just society. And I've helped both at the local level and the national level planning for this day of action. And I think today will be the largest one yet. You know, we had the first one in 2021, right as these bills were first being rolled out across the country. And so this is our third annual hashtag Teach Truth Day of Action. You can go to the zeneducationproject.org and find out where the rallies are in your city. And your location, and go join it today.
Absolutely. And you know, I mentioned to you off air that I've been following your work for years, really since I was a student teacher, I think, and I first read about some of the stuff y'all were doing up in Seattle with the SEE.
Oh, nice.
And your reform caucus up there, and longtime fan of Rethinking Schools and Zen Education Project. So really, you know, to me, it seems fitting that you would be involved in this. It seems to kind of fit right in with your career. So could you talk a little bit more just about like your journey in the movement? What led you up to this point?
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm really pleased to hear that my work's having that impact. And you know, I started teaching in Washington, D.C., and I think the 5th and 6th graders that I taught in D.C. really were teaching me. They were teaching me about the inequities in our society that has really propelled me to spend my life trying to transform the education system and the broader social structures that are creating such abhorrent inequality. You know, I taught at a school in Southeast DC, so I would drive by the White House, cross the Anacostia River, and be in a neighborhood that has been completely forsaken by anyone with power or money. It was a school that was 100% segregated, all Black children, and really the only services these children got, if you can call it services, was the police, who would roam the halls with impunity. I saw a police officer jack a 4th grader up against the wall, screaming in his face for throwing paper. You know, I had a hole in the ceiling of my classroom that I discovered when it rained. And the first project I ever assigned these students was to research somebody that they admired from history that had helped to create a better world and make a poster board. And we were set to present those posters on Monday, and we came in after the weekend, and there was a 1/2 inch standing water on the ground, and the posters were all destroyed. And I had to put an industrial sized garbage can under that hole, and it stood for 3 years, collecting water. And I began teaching in 2001, so it was the same year of the 9/11 attacks. And so we actually saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon from my classroom window. And it was a terrifying day, but I got to tell you, what's even more terrifying was seeing the U.S. mobilize untold fortune to go bomb people halfway across the world, but couldn't fix the hole in the ceiling of my classroom.
Right.
And that experience, I think, really led me to question the priorities of our country and to organize collectively with my colleagues to help create a more just education system.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Absolutely. And something I wanted to ask about, because I've been a rank and file teacher. I've been a field staffer for the Education Association representing teachers. And now I'm just an ally. I'm a public school parent. But my wife is a teacher. She's still in the classroom. Of course, teachers are always going to be near and dear to my heart. So I guess the thing that I'm most curious about is your thoughts when it comes to rank and file educators themselves organizing, and maybe, what is so important about that, particularly in this moment of attacks that we're seeing politically on the content that happens in our classrooms, the professions of the people teaching in the classrooms, the funding and the resources of the classrooms. So we're seeing these attacks from multiple directions. And I was just wondering if you could talk more about, why is it important that educators themselves are organizing and getting active and involved in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think educator unions are crucial to the well-being of education and the working class in general. And that's why they're so vilified by billionaires and the think tanks that they fund. If people want to do a deep dive on the history of educator unions in struggles for social justice, people should check out the book that I co-edited called Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice. And in the book, we really tell the story of the countless struggles throughout U.S. history and the growing movement today among rank and file educators to organize to fully fund education in the world's richest country. We shouldn't have holes in the ceiling that just allow the elements to destroy our kids' projects, right? But this is a common theme in American public schools, and the main obstacle to the destruction of public schools, to the gutting of the funding, is the teachers' unions. And I think that there's work to be done to reinforce those unions, to make them more robust, to make them more oriented towards struggles for social justice. But without them, we're really just throwing our children to the wolves, the billionaires who see dollar signs where they should see children. And that's what the whole privatization movement around vouchers and charters is about, where they want to gut the funding from the public schools and put them into unaccountable private hands. And the teachers' unions are crucial to standing up against that, and that's why they've been vilified. And I'll just reinforce how important they are today. While they're trying to outlaw the truth in education, they're trying to ban Black history. In Florida, they did ban the AP African American Studies class. In Florida, it's now a felony if you get caught with the wrong book in your classroom. Literally, it's a 5-year jail sentence and a $5,000 fine if a teacher gets caught with a book helping students understand racism or gender or transphobia, right? And we need organizations to help teachers collectively fight for the rights of teachers to teach students about their own culture and history and identities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that I really want to see the teachers unions step up and really live up to the responsibilities there, because as important as it is to, lobby for pay raises and lobby for better health insurance, negotiate for that, in some states, but here typically you're lobbying in Alabama. We don't have collective bargaining agreements for our teachers, but we do still have organizations of teachers, and I think it's important that they not avoid these difficult conversations. And I think that's what I've observed in the South, is that there is a reluctance to have these conversations for fear of brushing up against, Republican power, or perhaps alienating white teachers who may be more conservative politically. And I think that is a real mistake to do that. I think it's important that our unions be really engaged and vocal when it comes to matters of justice. And I think, as you illustrated, right, it's impacting teachers' ability to do their job. They're risking a felony to do right by their kids, And if our unions aren't involved in that, I don't know what they're going to be involved with. So I really appreciate your leadership.
No, thank you, man. And I'm heartened that today's action has been robustly supported by the NEA and the AFT. And I think it's a really great sign that we are entering an era where everybody knows that basic forms of democracy are under assault when teachers can't teach that slavery happened. And I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, right. I talked to a teacher named Greg Wickenkamp from Iowa, and Greg was teaching the book Stamped, the young adult version that gives the history of racist ideas. And he was attacked by a state legislator for teaching the truth that structural racism has existed in this country and was tied to slavery. And when he faced that attack, he contacted his superintendent, right? He wanted to know if the school district would support him in teaching about slavery. And people should go Google this video. It's breathtaking to watch his conversation with the superintendent, where he asked the superintendent point blank, "Can I teach that slavery is wrong?" And the superintendent saying, "No, that's an opinion." And we've reached a point in this country where the attack on anti-racist education is so intense that the superintendent of a school system can tell you that you can't teach that slavery is wrong. We are rapidly descending into a very scary situation that more closely resembles McCarthyism, right? Red Scare.
That's exactly what was on my mind, that this is the Red Scare, just a revival of the Red Scare. Maybe they're using some different terms now, but that's exactly what this is about.
That's it. Yep. I mean, we need to look to history to understand the moment we're in, right? I mean, the Red Scare, where all they had to do was call you a communist to get you fired or blacklisted, is so important to understand right now, because all they have to do now is call you a critical race theorist, right? And push you out of the classroom. And during the late 40s and 50s, thousands of teachers were fired all over the country who just wanted to teach about the labor movement or about the struggle for racial justice, and were labeled communists and pushed out of the classroom. There were over 400 teachers in New York City alone fired during the Red Scare. And people should also know that the Red Scare had an overlapping Lavender Scare, which was the attack on LGBTQ plus people, and that was especially vicious on queer educators. And Florida in the 50s had the Johns Committee, which investigated teachers prying into their personal lives to find out who was a homosexual, and then firing scores of teachers and revoking their teaching certificates. And this is the exact strategy that they're reviving today in Florida and in states all across the country, where they're attacking what they call gender ideology and critical race theory. And it's really scary, the impact that it's having on our educators and on our most marginalized students. And we need to learn this history. Educators need to learn the history of access to literacy in this country to understand the attack on anti-racist education today, right? Because, my ancestors were enslaved, and it was illegal for them to be literate, right? It was the 1739 Stono Rebellion in South Carolina occurred, led by a man named Jemmy. He was an enslaved man who marched with a banner that read liberty, and they picked up more and more enslaved African people who fought back against their captivity. And when they were captured and killed, the South Carolina authorities didn't just want to murder their bodies, they wanted to murder the ability of any enslaved person to ever write that word liberty again. And so in 1740, the first anti-literacy laws were passed, making it a crime to be literate if you were Black. And those spread across the country so that most of the South had severe penalties for learning to read or write if you were Black, and, including death. And, we can see a link from the attacks on Black literacy during the period of enslavement, the white supremacist movement during Reconstruction that burnt down over 600 Black schools, the attack on the freedom schools during the civil rights movement, and today's attack on anti-racist education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you connecting those dots there and bringing that history together, because I couldn't agree more. It's so critical that the rank and file educators know this history and know these struggles and how they are connected, and put it in context. And I think that's why it is so important that educators are having these conversations, and why, Zen Education Project doing this Teach Truth Day of Action is huge. And I'm really pleased to hear more support from, the more official labor corners with NEA and AFT. And I think that's really important, that they recognize these threats for what they are, and the ways in which they threaten the membership, but not just the membership, but the communities as a whole. So,
That's
Jesse,
right.
I really appreciate your leadership. I appreciate all you're doing. Was there anything else you wanted to share with us this morning?
Well, I guess I'd just end by saying that this idea that social justice educators got into teaching because they want to shame white kids is absolutely absurd. That's the main talking point of the right wing. And they say that critical race theory, which they use to label any kind of teaching that opposes racism, they say that that's just a trick to label and shame white children. And as an anti-racist educator my whole life, my goal has been actually to empower white children to see that they can be part of struggles for social justice. And those anti-racist struggles have been hidden from white children as well. They're often missing from the textbook, the examples of multiracial solidarity in struggles for everybody's liberation. And we want white children to learn about the Grimke sisters who fought against slavery, John Brown, who gave his life to fight against slavery. We want them to learn about Howard Zinn, who was really active in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, supporting Black students in the struggle to desegregate the South. We want them to understand that there's an important place for them to be in the struggles today for Black lives. And that's what really scares the right. They know that we're not shaming white kids. But what really scares them is that we're empowering white kids to better understand our society, the structures of racism, and how they could be part of a struggle that would not only free Black people, but free themselves. Because we know when all the world's resources are being used to oppress people. They're being siphoned out of the public schools, and that's hurting white kids who go to public schools as well. And so that the potential for that multiracial solidarity was on display in the 2020 uprising all across the country, which was the largest uprising in U.S. history, and it included people of all colors. And that's what terrified the right wing, seeing that kind of solidarity and the building racial consciousness that existed. And that's what we're experiencing now, is a vicious backlash to try to outlaw the discussion of how we build a better society. And we aren't going to quit. You know, I made a promise to my ancestors that, you know, I would not ever lie to children about enslavement, structural racism, regardless of the consequences. They can threaten us with jail, they can threaten us with fines, but we know that the truth is on our side, and we won't lie to children.
Amen, brother. Amen. They fear the interracial people power that we can build to build a better world. And I think you're exactly right. So, Jesse, thanks again for joining us. Best of luck with your day of action today in Seattle. Really wishing you all the best up there, and I hope it's a big success across the country.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. All right, y'all. Search hashtag Teach Truth Day of Action. You can find out more about what's happening across the country. I believe there is an event happening in Montgomery. I'm not sure if there's anything happening more like in Nashville or Chattanooga area. I haven't checked the map in a few days. But definitely check out Zen Education Project and definitely follow Jesse Hagopian. He's definitely an OG in the education movement. Big fan of his work. So appreciate Zen Education Project for what they're doing. Big fan of their lessons, big fan of the resources they provide, because as he said, it's to teach outside the textbook. It's to teach people's history and really to empower young people. And that's scary for some folks in charge. When we start talking about empowering young people and bridging racial divides and bridging other cultural divides and start uniting folks in interracial solidarity. That's a scary thing for folks in power. But that's all the more reason for us to keep it up.
Yeah. Adam, you ready to play that interview with that you had with David?
Yeah. I'm excited to share this with you. It is an interview with David Van Deusen, who is the president of the Vermont Labor Federation. Very militant brother out there in Vermont who led a reform caucus. His slate won office. So he's been in office some time now as a reformer and is doing some really interesting things out there in Vermont that it made me want to talk to him. I just wanted to check in with him because I'm seeing some of the interesting work that they're doing, whether that's international solidarity work or back during the 2020 election. I know David was very forward thinking in terms of how unions should be responding and was very militant in how unions should be dealing with our democratic society and trying to preserve democracy. So yeah, I had a good conversation with David and look forward to sharing it with you guys.
All right.
All right, folks. Adam Keller here with the Valley Labor Report. I'm excited about our next guest, one of the leaders of the labor movement in this country and president of the Vermont State Labor Council, David Van Deusen, elected to office in 2019 as part of the Progressive United Slate. He's a member of AFSCME Local 2413 in the Northeast Kingdom and serves on the Labor for Single Payer National Advisory Board and is a member of Labor Against Racism and Wars National Representative Assembly. David's also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and a past member of Anti-Racist Action. David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Adam.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And I've been seeing some of your work over the years as president. I know you have been quite vocal as a leader. Really appreciate all you've done for the movement. And I just wanted to start with an introduction. If you could just tell us about your story, what got you started in the labor movement, what's been your journey since then?
Sure. Well, first, let me say I'm excited to be talking with some of our union brothers and sisters today in the South. My dad's side of the family is from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've lived in Jacksonville. I've lived in New Orleans. So it's an absolute pleasure to kind of bring the conversation back home, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So speaking of how I got into labor, like many people, my dad was a union member. And he was an officer, elected to office within his union. Something I didn't really think about much as a kid. It's just you went to the doctor when you were sick and that was taken care of, right? These basic things. But it was part of the fabric of growing up, the fabric of part of my young existence as growing up working class. So joining a union, being a union, eventually becoming a union leader is just something that was a natural evolution. Now, I personally have, just like so many millions of other Americans, have gone through so many hardships and difficult times, both in childhood and later in life. And it makes sense that if we're going to change the world so that the working people that actually create all the wealth, the North, South, everywhere else, if we're going to actually get a fair shake, and if we're going to do better than our generations before us, the vehicle for that kind of change is when we come together and form a union. So we have a collective voice, a collective power to fight against those that have a vested interest in keeping us down. So to me, if you have any interest whatsoever or any belief that we as the working class deserve not to worry about can I afford groceries, and to deserve not to worry about whether or not you could have childcare for your kids. If we're not going to worry about these basic things, and if we're going to work every day, working 40 or 60 hours a week, we shouldn't have to worry about those things. And the way to make that change is through the labor movement, through unions, through forming a union, through having a collective voice for yourself, your coworkers, and the working class.
Amen, brother. I really appreciate your comments there, because ultimately I think the greatest force for democracy and for progress in this country is when working people come together collectively as a movement. And so I really, I love to hear it from someone who is a president of a state council. And I love to hear you talk that way. And I really appreciate that. And, on that subject, I just wanted you to talk about your experience as president of the Vermont State Labor Council. Talk to us about some of your goals and, what are you proud to have accomplished so far?
You got to understand that the experience of the Vermont AFL-CIO, first, you got to understand Vermont beyond whatever the stereotype might be in other places in the country. We are the most rural state in the country, demographically. We are basically one giant forest placed on top of a mountain range. So aesthetically, it doesn't look all that much different, although it's colder than, say, West Virginia. And we are a working class society, and we are actually very libertarian when it comes to things like the right to own a gun. I don't think there's a state in this country, the whole country, that is more lax on such things than Vermont. And yet we have the lowest rate of violent crime and murders in the whole country as well, because we still practice a very communal, direct version of democracy through our town meeting system. We know our neighbors. We know the people down the street. So in some ways we're blessed, and in some ways we're challenged. But when we ran for office, the United Slate in 2019, our state labor council was close to dead. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. The convention before, there was like 20 something delegates present to represent, over 10,000 workers. So just to put that in perspective, that's about as close as dead as you could get. So we ran on a radical, and when I say radical, I'm talking about like a working class left thing, which is very different than a liberal agenda. We ran on our 10-point program, our little green book, as our platform. And some of the things that we said is things got to change, and they got to change now. We need to engage the rank and file. We need to build real democracy within the AFL-CIO, within our state labor council, to get folks invested in what we're doing, right? To feel a sense of ownership over it. And instead of throwing good money after bad and sending a bunch of money folks to be lobbyists in our state house, which for years got us nowhere, we took that money out of that. And we said, this is what we need to do. We need to put that money towards organizing, like supporting our affiliates and not only new organizing new shops, bringing it into labor movement, but also internal organizing for the affiliated unions we already have to make them stronger and more member driven. And that's exactly what we did. Now, winning that election, and we almost swept every race. I think we won every contest in that internal election except for one. And in order to do that, we had to build a huge coalition of the building trades, of college professors, of municipal employees, laborers, you name it, we had to have them in there. So that was a good 6 month, that was a grassroots effort. And emerging out of that, we took our platform, and by a unanimous vote of the executive board, we made that the platform of the AFL-CIO, of the Vermont AFL-CIO. Since that time, we have become one of the only state labor councils in the country that is in fact growing on a consistent basis. We are organizing new shops across our mountains every month. It seems like we have something new growing. And we have real organizers on the ground to help our affiliates become stronger and help them to organize more workers into the movement. If I could pick one priority, it would be organizing, right? Because until we get to the point where the politicians fear us, until we grow big enough and we're organized strong enough, it doesn't matter what party's in power. And anybody that tells you that the Democrats are your friends or the Republicans are your friends, they're lying to you, right? It's been a long time since anybody from either of those parties have been our friends. They're the friends of the corporations. They're the ones who get the same money from the same billionaires, regardless if they have a D or an R next to their name. So what we need to do is not spend all of our time and money and resources in hitching our wagon to a party or hitching our wagon to suits and ties in Washington or in our state capital. We need to build our own power, and we need to grow as a labor movement. And once we do that, then we will instill fear if we're willing to use that power and be active and not be afraid of strikes and direct action. Then we could use that to build our power and make them fear us. And when they fear us, that's when we're going to start seeing progress in these state capitals in Washington, D.C. That's what happened in the 1930s when there was hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the street. There was work stoppages across this country. And that's when we got some good, damn good things, right? That we're still, working class is still benefiting from. But we're not going to build power by the inside game. We're going to build power by building working class unity and growing our ranks and being organized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, again, I love to hear that coming from leadership, because I think, you're speaking to, there has been some atrophy, I think, in our movement over the years. And there has been practices that we've relied on that have not been effective, whether it's just dumping money into Democratic campaigns or, the lobbying inside state capitals, despite being so outnumbered, and that's certainly something we can relate to here in Alabama, where, Republicans hold a super majority and Democrats, where they even exist, are not, exactly champions of labor, to put it mildly, so.
Put it very mildly, yes.
Yeah, so, and Alabama, we're outnumbered significantly. Our density is, of course, lower than in Vermont. But ultimately, whether you're in Vermont or Alabama, the name of the game is growth, addition and multiplication, because like you said, ultimately our progress is going to hinge on the leverage we have, which comes from our strength, and our growth. And I love that you mentioned the internal organizing, because we do have to get our own houses in order if we're going to be growing, right? And I think that's something that, can be lost in conversation, right? Everyone wants to get new shops. Everyone wants to show growth and add new numbers, but you got to take care of the folks you got, and you got to make sure they're actually engaged, and, the strength is coming from the bottom up. So I really, really appreciate your comments there. And I'm very interested in what's been going on in Vermont, and, the idea that a Reform Caucus has actually won and has a platform.
Yeah.
I got to say, that's really, really cool, and not something that I can particularly relate to down in Alabama, honestly.
Fair enough. But we didn't just win an election. We've won now 3 elections in a row, hands down, like just absolutely killed it. 3 elections in a row. We have a new election coming up, internal election in September. I'm very optimistic about that too. That said, look, when you said the Democrats aren't our friends. And you said you got 2/3 Republicans down there. Now, here's the thing. If you're a working class person, neither of those parties, neither of those parties represent us. Let's not kid ourselves. Right. They find cultural issues to fight over to pretend that there's foundational differences. Now, I'll grant you this. In the National Republican Party over the last few years has become increasingly what I'm concerned as neo-fascist, right? That is a new direction. The traditional Republican Party is a very different beast entirely. But the Democrats, and I'm happy to talk about the Republicans, but the Democrats, if you want to see where they stand when push comes to shove, look no further than the crappy deal that Washington, D.C. pushed down throat of the rail workers this winter. Rail workers in this country, in unions, they get paid a good wage, 0 sick days. Can you imagine having 0 sick days, right? 0. In Vermont, a few years back, we passed a law saying everybody has to at least have a right to 5 sick days a year. Everybody, union, non-union, every single person, man and woman. But those folks have 0 sick days. And the Democratic Party lined up to shove down their throats and mandate that they're going to eat this bad deal and live with it for the next several years. And they took away their right to strike. And Joe Biden likes to get up in front of TV cameras and say he's the most pro-union president ever. Well, I got news for you. If that's the most pro-union president ever, when it takes the rights of thousands and thousands of rail workers to strike away from them and shoves down a deal with 0 sick days built in, well, then we're in real trouble. And that's why I say it's a waste of energy, it's a waste of time, and frankly, it's divisive for us to continue down this misguided road of getting behind Democrats just because they're not Republicans, right? But the Republicans are the enemy too. There has never been a time in history when working class people that work with their hands, right? When they are the friends and they are the allies and we have something in common with billionaires. I don't care what it is that you do at the end of the day when you go home, right? But you got nothing in common with the billionaire class, nothing. Right. And all they're trying to do is fool you and trick you and divide you so you don't figure out that shit, man, we could build our own power on our own, right? As a working class. And then we, not somebody else, not some high horse liberal somewhere, right? Disconnected from the working class, but we ourselves could decide our own fate. And we could decide what our agenda is. And that's part of what labor needs to do by building democracy within the labor movement. So it's actual rank and file folks, blue collar, white collar workers who define what our priorities are and not have them dictated to us from some person or entity or so-called leader or what have you from above. And that's what's going to get people active. That's what's going to get them involved because they're going to feel ownership over those decisions. They're going to say, we're doing this because we decide this together. And then they're more likely to stand with you like a brother and sister to fight to see it through and win. But I can't say it enough. The Republicans and Democrats will never do the right thing until we make them fear us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, there's a couple of things you brought up there that I really appreciated. And one of them is that, democracy has muscles that we have to exercise. And so if we don't even have democracy within our own unions, how can we expect to, build a more democratic society outside of them? And so I think that's really, really important. But as you spoke to, the Democrats proclaim themselves to be friends of labor. Until it's actually time to be a friend, right? Until it's time to show up. It's one thing to say you support workers' rights to join a union, but what happens when there's union busting? Where are you? Just like, you can support the right to strike and, except, right? Terms and conditions apply.
Except when it matters.
Except when it matters. And, down here in Alabama, we had historic coal strike. Coal miners with the UMWA were on strike for nearly 2 years down in Brookwood, Alabama. And not a damn soul from the White House or the National Democratic Party bothered to say anything. I believe your senator, Bernie Sanders, was the only one out of all of them to mention this strike, to try to lift a finger to help these brothers and sisters who were fighting, finance capital at its worst. And
well, keep in mind, Brother Sanders, is not a member of the Democratic Party, right?
Right.
Now, he has been a friend of ours for decades, a solid friend. There's not a union member in the 13,500 union members in the AFL-CIO in Vermont. I don't think there's been one of them that's ever gone on strike that hasn't at some point walked the picket line with Bernie Sanders shoulder to shoulder. And we were in contact with his office during the betrayal of the Democratic Party to our rail workers. And he was fighting like hell on the Senate floor to get a better deal for him. But he is far and few between.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 99% of all those other people up there, they could give a rat's ass, because at the end of the day, what they care about is those owners of those railroads. And you could extrapolate that to just about anything else. Now, you remember in the last election, in every election, they promised us the world, and they don't do anything, you know, and the Republicans do that too. You know, Donald Trump, we call folks down in New York up here, we call them flatlanders. I don't know what your term is, Yankee or something like that. But, you know, he's a flatlander New Yorker, billionaire, who's got nothing in common with us. You know, the guy's a con man. He said he's going to make things great for working people. He seated a bunch of corporate assholes on the National Labor Relations Board that did horrible rulings against working people. His Supreme Court folks that he appointed took away union dues as a condition of employment for public sector workers. And he actively tried to take the voluntary of home healthcare providers across this country from paying any union dues at all, right? So that is one side of the betrayal. And the other side of the betrayal is the Democrats. When Obama and all the Democrats were in power, they said they were going to give us the Employee Free Choice Act, basically more democratic free way to join or start a union. That went nowhere, for the Democrats in control of all branches in government. And this time around, Joe Biden and all of his buddies who are running for office said they were going to deliver on the PRO Act, which would be a far-reaching, very good piece of legislation that would empower unions and working class people to get a better deal in life. And that went exactly nowhere too, because there's always going to be villains and there's always going to be foils who are bought off by the corporate interests from within that party and the Republicans to make sure that doesn't happen. But if they get scared of us, if they think that the only other option is something much more scary than some folks being angry, you know, that's when they're going to start to make movements. And I think we also should consider the notion of starting another party, national party.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That wasn't on my list, but I'm you know, and I should provide you some context in terms of Alabama. Like I mentioned, it's dominated by the Republican Party. The Alabama Democratic Party is semi non-existent. I mean, it is not a functional, viable, legitimate political party. And that's before you even get into the actual content of their policies, which is not pro-worker. And so we're kind of, you know, down here, a lot of activists are having these conversations like, should we start a new labor party in Alabama? Where do we go? How do we proceed with a coalition that can actually, you know, build political progress for working people?
I think the last time I saw an aspect of a Southern Democratic Party that seemed of interest, and I'm sure there's downsides to it too, but I find Huey Long down Louisiana to be a fascinating historical figure that did some good for the folks down Louisiana, no doubt about it, especially school children. But if you have a broken party that does not represent your interests and there isn't a functioning infrastructure in Alabama, why bother? Why put the energy into building a thing that already time and time again for 7 years has betrayed you? I would question the sanity of such a move. And I would suggest that looking at building a new labor third-party option might be something to consider. Here in Vermont, we're one of the only states in the country that does have a real third party. The lieutenant governor is part of the Progressive Party. There's a caucus in the state house with senators and state reps from the Progressive Party. And they're essentially working class left party. They're pro-union party. And we've endorsed them, the Vermont AFL-CIO, in several election cycles now. They're full slate. And we've gotten behind them. That started when Bernie Sanders was mayor of Burlington, which is our biggest city with about 39,000 people in it today. And that was a coalition that came out of that city and then went statewide. I think it would be worth taking a look take a gander at what's happened up here. Do a little research for folks in Alabama or in the South, and see what the Progressive Party was able to build, making real inroads, I might add, with farmers too, because of a lot of farmer organizing with the family farms getting screwed. They're in the same position as workers as far as the big interest versus the small guy. But I would also remind folks, though, that I think it's important to engage in electoral politics because electoral politics matters. But I also don't think one should make a fetish of it. I think the most important thing is building your own power base and your own power that's independent of all political parties, and not simply putting money into PACs and knocking on doors over a candidate, because candidates come and gone. Working class power can be forever.
Amen. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's very, very relevant to the conversations that we're having down here. And yes, we absolutely will be doing some more research on what's happening in Vermont in terms of the Progressive Party and third-party efforts there. And sort of along that line, we're definitely interested in what other state federations are doing, what other labor councils are doing, what we can learn as activists and organizers from what folks across the country are doing. And as y'all mentioned with Vermont, you do have a stronger union movement. You have cities like Burlington that have implemented a variety of progressive policies. The state legislature has some progressive policies, certainly comparative to Alabama. And you mentioned the town meetings and this strong bottom-up democratic culture that you have in Vermont. So, was there anything else you've mentioned? You've already given us some stuff to chew on, honestly, but was there anything else you think maybe in terms of accomplishments or practices of the labor movement in Vermont that we might want to know about down here in the South?
Well, shit, I mean, it depends where you are in the South. I mean, like I said early on, we're very rural up here. Our biggest city is 39,000 people. I'd say 80% of our roads are dirt roads. I'd say half the folks are driving trucks, and there's tens of thousands of hunters here. So demographically, we're a little different than some of the big states, like say New York or California or stuff like that. But our experience up here is if you really make a space for working people to have a voice and not just feel like they're being talked at, right? They're being talked with, then folks will show up. Our last several conventions, we've passed measures that more than double the amount of delegates each affiliate gets. And when we've increased the threshold to make it harder to move away from a participatory democracy model on the floor versus like a weighted voting thing, it's getting a little weeds a little bit. But we've taken every step we could in making our minutes and our statements very public. We've taken every step we could to involve folks, right? And ask what they think and get them involved and making their vote matter. And that's had a big impact. We just had a strike up here with maintenance workers and what have you at this little college. They were out on strike for 3, maybe a little more than that, weeks. And there were workers from unions all over coming up to walk their picket line and support them. And they not only won the fair raises they were looking for, but they also made it so in their contract, there's no management rights clause, which if you're in the union world, that's a really big deal.
That is a really big deal.
Yeah, so they won their strike, but you can't be afraid to take action and do it, and if you got two devils, a devil and an angel on your shoulder, it's not wise to listen to the voice all the time that says we got to make a deal. Sometimes you don't have to make a deal. Sometimes you got to fight. But we've stood up for our principles in a smart way. We've thought we've worked really hard to move things in a good working class left direction, but at the same time, not to be too far out ahead of the rank and file, right? Because the rank and file is the one that's got to really define where we're going to put the priorities. So if you do that, if you stay relevant, if you take your money out of lobbying, right? Because there's very little that you're going to get out of lobbying. I can tell you that right now. At best, you're going to beat, down south, I'm going to guess the best you're going to do is you're going to beat a few bad things from happening. Right. That's different than winning good things. Right. And so if you can't win because the deck is stacked on the political level, then we got to change the deck entirely. And you do that by putting resources and organizers and time into the nuts and bolts of organizing. And then once they're in the union, that's not good enough either. Then you have to work hard to really get down to the grassroots, right? To really internally organize. So it's not just a group of folks that come together every 3-4 years to bargain a contract, but folks that are regularly meeting and have effective, good union stewards, and who are talking about the issues of the day. And that then needs to come back to the leadership. It needs to be a two-way street. Right. So stick to your principles, organize, but be practical, and don't get all caught up in the electoral politics stuff.
Right, right. And, you're talking about building power from the bottom up, and you're also talking about the, real expressions of solidarity that people can practice and live and grow from.
Yeah.
And, one thing that I know about you is that you are an internationalist. To kind of switch gears a little bit, I know you recently held an event with some Kurdish unions, and I'm just interested, you could tell us a little bit about that event, but also more broadly, why is it important for unions to have international perspectives and that international solidarity? Because frankly, it's not something I see a ton of in our movement. So that really stood out to me, that you have that perspective.
Well, let's put it this way, right? ExxonMobil, Amazon, all the car companies, these folks, these are international corporations.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just live in the United States. And so when they're building their wealth, building their version of power, and they're building their influence, it's not just in Vermont or Alabama or Louisiana, right? They're building that across the globe. And the way that they often screw us or seek to screw us is they'll play one group of working class people in one country off another. So our manufacturing jobs, right, under the Democratic leadership of Bill Clinton, right, they did screw us with NAFTA and all these terrible free trade agreements. But when that happened, the jobs went to Mexico, right? And then down in Mexico, where the unions are weak, and at the time, it's starting to change, but at the time were essentially government unions, weren't independent voices of labor. They were able to pay pennies on the dollar for the same labor down there they would up here. And as long as they could do that by moving jobs, be it to Asia or somewhere else, and they could just move them around to wherever it's cheapest, then your victories are to be made asunder, right? Your victories, you could win a great contract one year, and then 10,000 jobs go overseas. So if we're going to beat capital, if we're going to beat the billionaires, if we're going to beat the corporations, which we will, we're only going to do that as an international working class, right? So that means if I'm a trade unionist here in Vermont, not only do I got to reach my hand down to Alabama and the South and Tennessee and Florida, right, to build solidarity among our states, but that means we also have to reach our hand out to working class people that are struggling just like we are to pay for a decent standard of living for their families in other places in the world. And we have to start to think in terms of global contracts. It's not just good enough that we strive towards a livable wage in one place in the United States or in Europe, wherever it may be. We need to strive for that on a global scale so that the corporations, the capitalists, can't just run from the cheapest labor pool to the next cheapest labor pool.
Right.
So that's why international solidarity is absolutely crucial in the long term, because our fight is not just a state fight. It's not just a national fight. It's an international struggle to change the very foundation of what's fair and what's not fair, who gets a good deal, who doesn't, right? And this all for me is grounded in working class and working class solidarity. So that's why we do take interest in Vermont in the international politics. And that's why I think all good labor movements and unions should.
Absolutely. Was there anything that really stood out about the Kurdish unions when you talked to them recently?
Well, goddamn, a lot of people aren't going to know this because, look, Syria, they're in northeast part of Syria. It's not Europe. It's not North America. If this shit was going down in North America or Europe, it'd be the front page of the newspaper every day. What do you know about Syria? There's some guy who's an asshole who's in charge over there, right? Everyone knows that. And then there's some crazy fundamentalists trying to kill everybody, right? That's kind of what people know. It's so much more than that. A third of the country, give or take, the folks rose up, the majority Kurds, right? But it's also Arabs and other folks there too. They rose up with guns, drove out ISIS, drove out those wingnuts, right? They're frankly fucking dangerous. Drove them out. Nobody did it for them. They drove them out, right? And in its place, in the place of this terrible ideology, or for that matter, the quasi dictatorship under Assad, they started to work a new society based on direct participatory democracy, secular. It's not religious. Everybody's included, equal rights for women, all this shit. So can you imagine in the heart of the Middle East right now, there's a group of folks with rifles in their hand fighting day and night now against the Turks. The Turks, which are part of NATO invaded the northern part of the country. And these folks are fighting for a direct participatory democracy, which is not like a greatly empowered Vermont town meeting system of government. And the unions there are a central partner, the labor unions, in building this democracy and being able to define how they make economic transitions, right, into a more sustainable, more bottom up, more working class driven economy. This is absolutely incredible. So this is on par with like the Spanish Civil War or the Paris Commune of 1871. This is maybe the most far reaching revolutionary situation in the world in the last 50 years. And I think it behooves labor to lend solidarity. The unions out there reached out to us through a third party looking to build contacts with American labor unions. We were happy to do our part by jointly hosting a panel discussion. We drew in a lot of labor folks from around the United States, their leaders, to hear their story and hear the struggle they're going through right now, including bombardments and occupations from the right-wing Turkish government. So we're helping to get the word out. The labor movement in Vermont some years ago, we were proud to sponsor a returning American volunteer who fought in their YPG in their military for these ideals. We got him a job when he came back with the IBEW, the electricians union, gave him a place to live, paid his way for 3 months till he got settled in. And we have an ongoing commitment that any American who returns after fighting the good fight over there, we're happy to hook them up, do our best to hook them up with a good union job and support them when they get back.
Hell yeah. I love that. I love the international solidarity. I love the necessity that we have to learn from one another and learn from each other's struggles, learn from each other's successes, and what are other people doing that's working in sometimes very different conditions. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned earlier, we're all in this struggle together. Capital is internationalist. Labor has to be internationalist. And so I really applaud you and the Vermont AFL-CIO for what y'all are doing on that, because, for me personally, I was politicized really in reaction to the Iraq War as a millennial. Like a lot of millennials, that's what really got me involved in politics was the war. And so, as I've gotten more into labor, I see that, a principled anti-war position or, a principled internationalist position is not always that common. And so, yeah, I really applaud you for what you're doing there, and definitely look forward to checking out more information there with the Kurdish unions. And I think it's fantastic. My last question I had for you is just, as a labor leader, I'm really curious, what are you keeping your eye on as we go throughout the rest of 2023? What would be, in terms of labor news and developments, is there anything in particular that you're really kind of looking at?
Well, I think we really need, as a labor movement across the country, we really need to start making more progress. Progress is made, but more in the giant tech-related companies. We've seen the one warehouse, of course, in New York City unionized for Amazon. There's other attempts underway in different parts of the country. I think that is crucial that we do a good job there. I believe some Teamsters out west just organized some of the drivers as well. I'm happy about the retail end of things. There's millions of retail workers who get a shitty deal all across the nation. And so when you see hundreds of Starbucks organizing, I think that's great.
Right.
We just organized our first Ben and Jerry's, the flagship shop.
I saw that. That's
in
awesome.
Burlington. So I'm hoping that catches on too, because for too long, those huge corporations that make so much money, right? They have been just neglecting their workers, and their workers make pennies, and it's just not right. So those breaking into those industries, breaking into perhaps more of the side of the electric cars too. I'd like to see Tesla unionized. There's a lot of work to be done, but realistically, it's not going to happen magically. The way we have to do this is we have to decide what's really important as a labor movement at the state labor council level and at the national AFL-CIO level. And we got to make hard choices and say, look, what are we getting for the millions and millions we're sinking into these elections, right? And these lobbying efforts. And if the answer is very little or nothing, which frankly it is, then we got to make the hard decision to take those millions of dollars out of that, and we got to put it into organizing, and frankly have organizers deployed either by the national AFL-CIO or the state labor councils in every state, in every corner of every state, because there's no magic wand here. There's no switch we flip and then we win. We win by hard work, and hard work means resources to organize.
Amen, brother. Yeah, absolutely. David, was there anything else you wanted to say, before I let you go?
Well, I know you got listeners down in New Orleans, so I would love for someone
do.
to tell me if the Abbey on Decatur Street sells the best jukebox in that city. That's the main question I have. So somebody could email me, look up the Vermont AFL-CIO on internet, and just let me know if the Stooges is still on there. That would be good to know.
Oh yeah, awesome. Well, David, I really, really appreciate your time, and more importantly, I appreciate your leadership. I really do. I appreciate your leadership and being an outspoken advocate and sticking true to your principles. And I hope to see many, many more folks with that kind of style excel into leadership. So, thanks again for your time, and thanks for all you're doing for the movement.
Solid here, brother.
Appreciate you.
All right, folks, with that interview wrapping up, we are going to go ahead and roll out. We appreciate your time. Just one more reminder that Shop Talk this week is going to be at 10:30 a.m. Central Time on YouTube and Facebook instead of the usual 9:30 because of scheduling conflicts. We appreciate your patience and understanding with us there.
Yeah, and I have a great guest planned. It's going to be a really good conversation, I think. A little bit of training, a little bit of history, a little bit of both.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I really enjoyed that interview with David. That was great.
I thought so too. I could have talked with David for a long time, and I've been seeing what he's doing, and I even see some of his stuff on Facebook from various labor movement groups I'm part of, and David is just always active. He's a real militant leader. He's no bullshit, just straight up guy. You can probably see why we had to play it in overtime instead of the main show. But I really enjoyed the interview, enjoy his leadership, and so definitely y'all stay tuned with what's happening in Vermont. And also wanted to mention before we get off the air here that I was on America's Workforce Radio this week, appeared on Wednesday morning, I believe it was. I was an emergency guest, so it took me a little bit by surprise. I wasn't totally as super prepared as maybe I would like to have been, but give it a listen and you let me know how it turned out. I think it turned out pretty well, actually. I always enjoy going on America's Workforce. Jacob's been on a few times. Ed Flash Ferentz has been on our show before. They do a daily union talk radio show 5 days a week up in Ohio. And so it's a great program, America's Workforce Radio. Check that out. And yeah, we're getting some good feedback on the interview with David. Lenny says he wants to move to Vermont and work with that dude. Same, brother. I felt the same way. Like, hey, you got a spot for me up there, sign me up. Let me join the Army there with David, because he's a real go-getter.
Yeah.
And Vex, thank you for your kind comments and for your super chat as well. Really appreciate that. I agree that we had 3 great guests today. I am a big fan of Jesse Hagopian. If you couldn't tell from the interview, I've really been following his work for a long time, since I was a youngin'. And so it was really cool to get to speak with him, and I look forward to seeing what the Teach the Truth Day of Action, how that pans out this weekend. Was glad to hear NEA and AFT are supporting it this year. Glad to see they're actually engaged in this, because they need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned having followed Jesse Hagopian, definitely a motivation that I have for the show that I don't talk about very much is that I just get to I have reason to ask people that I think are interesting to talk to me.
Absolutely. And that was the interview with David. It wasn't that, something happened to Vermont that necessarily, urged me to do it. It's just I've been following his work. I've seen that he does good work. He's a cool guy, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk with him, and I'm glad y'all felt the same way. And that's kind of our approach. Sometimes it's news-based. Sometimes it's just cool people we've been meaning to reach out to. We do have quite a few folks we've got a whole spreadsheet of folks to talk to this next few months over the summer. We've got some really cool people who've expressed interest in coming on the program. If you know someone that you would like us to talk to, always, feel free to hit us up and let us know. We appreciate the recommendations. And also feel free to reach out to that person and be like, hey, you should go on the Valley Labor Report. That always helps.
Right.
So yeah, we've got a great shop talk planned this upcoming week with Bill Berry, a longtime organizer. Going to do some training and some history. Next weekend, we are working on a special guest. I'm not 100% sure if she'll be here, but it'll be a great one if she is. And some other great guests coming down the pike. So appreciate everyone who has supported us, everyone who tunes in, and appreciate all your feedback.
With that, we will see you next week.
Solidarity, y'all.